texting and on WhatsApp on 07779481822. That's 07779481822. You can call us. I'm not sure if we are admin. You can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm not sure if we can take live calls, but 01582481822. Admin will let me know. But definitely WhatsApp is an option. Brother Shakaib, how are you doing? How is the weather in the US?
um, Thank you for having me, actually. I really do appreciate your time. It's an honor and a privilege to be here today. I'm doing well. The weather is actually really nice.
As long as it's not as gloomy as we are here in the UK. Well, we had a number of days of sunshine, but here we are. That's a rich weather. Actually, let's start with that. Because I've been having an interesting conversation with a few people, and a lot of people said, the reason why people say Muslim countries, and again, apologies for the background, that people say, Muslim countries are where people want to move. It's not because of the Muslim countries, it's because of the weather. That is genuinely an argument that I've heard. They say that sunshine can apparently make you a happier person. So, I mean, generally speaking, it varies quite a lot in America, does it?
Well, it does. It does. And it also depends on where you are, to be honest, because in the US, it's, essentially from the East Coast to the West Coast, you'll get every single type of weather. So for me in particular, I've been living in Texas for the last 7 years, where it's quite warm. And in the afternoon, you can get upwards of 100 degrees. I know what that's in Celsius.
That would be boiling hot. I think that, I think it's like 40, isn't it? 30 to 40, I think.
Probably above 35, I would say, in Celsius. I know in Fahrenheit, in, if you would say June, July, and August, it'll get to maybe 105.
So 38 days, 37. So that's huge, that's tremendous. I mean, 38 here, we once had, I think, 32, and a few people passed away because it was that hot. I mean, the heat wave was, and you get it, everyone complaining about it. I remember actually it was 38 in one of the undergrounds in London. We've got the undergrounds, right? And so that was 38, and people were going like, oh, this is crazy, this is the hottest it's ever been. So, Texas.
Yeah, Texas is pretty hot.
Well,
in particular, I'm in Austin, Texas. So, over there it's a bit of dry heat. So if you're sitting under shade and it's under a tree, you still got a nice breeze and you can still hang out outside, even in the 38-degree weather. So it's not so bad. For us, we actually get almost 6 to 7 months of, you can say summer because it stays pretty hot. Having been to the UK a couple of times, the highest I've seen so far is around 25 Celsius. Maybe it'll get to 30.
Yeah, and that's the heat. Because I mean, I've been just to the other side, with the west coast, sorry, and that was again there was a lot of rain, similar to the UK, but it was overall warmer temperatures I found than here. But I think New York and stuff we can get quite cold. Because whereas in the UK, the reason I asked the question, the UK population, specifically Muslim population, it doesn't really, there's no variation. And that is not a factor in the UK. Oh, I live in London or I live in Manchester. It's roughly the same.
Right. Unless
you live in like the Shetland Islands or north of Scotland or something like that.
Right.
It's different. But in the US, that is a genuine consideration for people. Do they care so much about the weather?
Yeah, 100%. Yeah. People tend to, often, at least recently, have been moving to Dallas a lot more. Part of it is for the Muslim community, but also a lot of it has to do with the weather because it does stay warm. And you don't have snow, especially in the East Coast, having been lived in New York, Maryland, Virginia, Buffalo areas. On the East Coast of the United States, you got heavy snow happening, upwards of even sometimes 2 feet of snow. Wow. And so that accumulates. You gotta clean that yourself. It gets extremely cold, the wind chill. So a lot of folks recently have been choosing to either go to Florida, which is right in the middle. It's in the panhandle of the United States. Then you have Texas, of course, which is southwest, and then of course all the way on the west coast you have California. A lot of places in California actually get consistent weather where they stay throughout the year around 20, 25 degrees Celsius, and that's just the weather. You just walk around throughout the year, even in winter.
That's amazing. Right. And the summer doesn't, it's not crazy hot.
No, it stays consistent.
Where is this place? I might be leaving this marathon. Right, now that's incredible. So you have a choice. The purpose, obviously, of the show, and we've done this previously, we've talked about, obviously, some people wanted to move, doing hijrah from the UK to places like Pakistan, Turkey, the Middle East. And obviously, our audience for the Shakaib is, generally speaking, it's a Muslim audience. Like it's a wider community, and I think whether is not dependent on religion or background, but a lot of factors that we'll discuss today are obviously going to be based around religion, even partly ethnicity, I suppose. And so, I think a lot of people have started recently considering America as an option. I'll tell you why. Because the US, it seems, is still quite, in our eyes, and maybe on the other side of the pond, see it quite religious, right? Now, obviously not in the movies and stuff, but whether it was the rise of Donald Trump and whether it's the new movement with with the drive of family values and the attacks that are taking place in those regards, it seems that America, there's still a lot of conservative Christians. And so a lot of Muslims feel around Europe and the UK in particular that because there's too many secular people in these countries, we'll be safer in some aspects in a place like the USA. Is religion a big part of what you've seen? I'm not talking just Muslims, I'm talking generally in society, because I can tell you my experience in the UK, it is not. Most people are either atheists or agnostics. Agnostic, that's the one, right? Which is, we don't know.
Yeah, they don't believe in anything. Yeah. They do believe in a higher power.
Yeah, and so they just say, we don't know, so can't say for sure.
Yeah.
And so whatever.
It's hard to say. To be honest, I think most recently, I would say in the last decade or so, it's becoming, the trend is very, very similar to what you're describing, where most people are going in the direction of being agnostic or being atheist. So even the Christian population, even though it's the predominant population in the US, they're mostly not church going. Right? You have large number of churches, both in terms of the amount and the size, but mostly they're empty. So, and we're moving away from religion, to be honest, for the most part. So,
right. So there is that similarity, but you're right. No, it's interesting. I think younger generation specifically is, it seems, more disenfranchised with the notion of religion. It's good, and I suppose it's pros and cons, and there's a reason why it's happening, but that's a totally different discussion. Now, your own background obviously is Pakistani in terms of ethnicity. What is the makeup of the American society? Not in terms of exact numbers, but because in the UK, obviously the largest is Pakistani, I believe, followed by Indian and Bangladeshi. But from a Muslim perspective, it's Pakistani, then the Bangladeshis, and then we have some Arabs, we have some Somalis, some Egyptians. But mostly it's Pakistani and Malalis. That's across the UK.
Yeah. So I think, well, I guess the first step is to kind of talk about the Muslim population in general, right? So we've got about 300 and you could say 360 million people in the United States overall. And I think as of 2000, I can't remember when the last census was done, but the Muslim population was around 3%.
Right.
So you're still talking about upwards of 10 million Muslims in the United States.
Yeah.
However, that population is really, if you go to the US, you cannot tell this is a Muslim area for the most part. There's very few locations, like very epicenter of, inner cities where you can go and recognize that this might be a Muslim area. For the most part, we're really, really spread out.
Right.
And the same is true for the division of ethnicity. So Pakistanis, Bangladeshis, all the Middle Eastern countries. I don't really honestly have statistics to back this up, But as far as the distribution, the distribution is quite even, to be honest. In the United States.
And it's not, as you say, parts where you can be like, this is Pakistan, this is Bengali. Like, for instance, if you go to Whitechapel in London, which is very central London, it's predominantly Bengali. So it's Muslims, but predominantly Bengali Muslims.
Yeah.
Whereas Ilford, predominantly Pakistanis, or Tooting, predominantly Pakistanis. So we do have splits. You can tell that quite obviously. I mean, for instance, Bradford is called Bradistan. So, yeah, so we actually have cities now, which are Birmingham, Manchester. Luton is an example of it, but the outskirts is slightly different. So you don't have that concentration, generally speaking.
Generally speaking, no. So, for example, take New York City, for example. New York City, in general. So you have New York State, right? And then within New York State, you have New York City, right? And bear with me a little bit, just so I give you a little bit of geographic so you have full understanding.
Yeah, that's good. A lot of listeners will have no clue.
So you have New York State, which is on the eastern side of the United States, and within New York State, you have New York City, which is where Manhattan is. So in New York City, you have 5 different boroughs. You have Manhattan, you've got Bronx, Brooklyn, Staten Island, and Queens. Right? So some of these parts, like for example, in Queens and Bronx, you'll see a much higher concentration of Muslims. And this kind of is becoming a hub for Muslims, mostly Pakistani and Bengalis, even non-Southeast Asians, just because it's the major airport where most people initially when they come, they land there, and most people that land in New York City tend to kind of settle in New York City. So there's some small niche areas.
It's like London in that sense.
Yeah. You'll have a concentration of Muslims, but outside of that, if you go anywhere else, for the most part, you're unable to tell if this is a Muslim community or not. Part of it is just because it's so vast, and most places you need cars to travel. So it's hard to tell if it's a Muslim community or not.
Yeah, is that a problem? I wonder, because and obviously it's quite a frank conversation, but I wonder here in the UK we have a lot of concentration. That has 2 sides, I suppose. And we can talk about Luton because obviously one of the listeners believe we have a question. We'll come to the question shortly. But we know in Luton that there is concentration, like Berry Park, and you've got areas surrounding Berry Park, and there's a benefit to that. For instance, there's a lot of masses close by. Generally you won't have hate incidents of hate crime against Muslims, Islamophobia, or even racism. Those kind of things are protected, right? And then there's a close community. So, for instance, if from a Muslim point of view, you won't see Muslims walking around drinking, like alcohol, even though it's solely pretty much most shops in America. You won't see Muslims walking around with beer in their hands and drinking. It's not a common sight. At night time, sometimes you'll see people come out, but it's very rare. Whereas if this was High Town, for instance, Dunstable, or if it was another place which is less Muslim centric, that's a very common sight. Pubs around. Hey, you won't see any pubs in Luton that are coming from the top of my head. Most pubs are closed. And so the entire culture and environment is very different because of the densely populated Muslim population. So I wonder if that is, but there's obviously negatives, and I'll come to that. But do you guys feel that? Because you've been to Pakistan, you spent some time in Pakistan, do you feel that is lacking in some way not to have that concentration?
Yeah, certainly. I think, but not from the perspective that you're describing. I think we certainly miss having a strength of the community in many different ways, mainly politically. Having that strength and being able to make your voice heard, whether it's schools, whether it's community, whether it's not wanting a pub next to your house or your community, or mostly for us, we don't really have a pub culture more so, but it's a lot more liquor store, we call it, right? So essentially just selling alcohol. But people generally, we don't, outside of inner cities where you'll see a lot of homelessness.
Yeah.
A lot of people on the street sleeping, and mainly those individuals kind of, you'll see them drinking or even get into drugs.
Mm-hmm.
Outside of those city centers, you don't have that issue. In we call them upstate.
Yeah.
Places away from the
Suburbs.
Suburbs.
Right.
But yeah, I think drinking, from that
I
perspective.
mean, that was just an example of
Right.
course.
But there are definitely things that we miss because we don't have concentration of our population in certain areas.
Yeah.
And the areas that do have it, certainly you see a huge impact in terms of
cleanliness.
That's for sure. But in terms of like the makeup of the schools and for example, having days off for Eid.
Right. Yeah.
New York City now until recently have allowed to have your own days off for Eid. Prior to that, you have to take days off. There's no such thing.
So now it's officially allowed. You're talking about from school perspective or a working perspective?
From school,
Okay.
not work.
Right.
From school for children, they're able to have official holidays for Eid celebration.
And that's just happened recently.
Yeah, and that's it. It's still only in New York City. Outside of New York City, you still don't have people. Haven't heard.
Yeah. See, I went to school a few months back now, and a few months back, and turn of the century, and so when we went to school, that was. And again, this was Lucian, right?
Yeah.
So that was a well-known thing that kids, not from offices, that's different.
Yeah.
But children, we had school holidays for Eid, and it wasn't any issues that Eid 3 days.
Yeah.
Bye bye. See you later for Lucian, that kind of situation. So and so it became just normal. But that's in Lucian. Now the same thing wouldn't apply in, for instance, very non-Muslim area. In a particular Oxford, for instance, in particular boroughs, you told them. I've got Eid, they'll be like, what's that? Right? So we didn't have that. Again, halal food is one of the biggest examples. Because I lived in Luton, I lived in Borzak, which was like the polar opposite, right? Borzak is basically, I'll describe it to you, it's a completely white village, and that's not wrong to say because I'm just identifying, right? Completely white village, and they have 2 pubs. And pubs, in our culture, in the British culture, it's not like trashy necessarily. Pubs can be quite high-end as well. Not high-end, but it's not people throwing beer at each other. It's not like it's like a restaurant almost.
Right.
But it's called a pub. And that is where the community gathers. Like you have a masjid, they have a pub. That's what it is. The church is not really a very popular place in the UK. So we had a couple of pubs, and then it was just a couple of supermarkets, and that was it. That was the entire village. Right? Yeah. Muslim wasn't nowhere. And when I went there, some of the people had never seen a Muslim before. So they were very fascinated by it. They tried to touch my face.
Is there really?
But they didn't just
they have this issue in the US of touching the hair.
No way. Yeah. Go on.
Yes.
That sounds very interesting.
We'll leave it. Continue.
So they were very curious, and then obviously they asked questions and led to a conversation. But the point was, one of the things I really struggled with was food. There was nothing I could eat except for something vegetarian. And so coming into an area like Luton, every single shop is halal. There's no question. You just eat like you're in a Muslim country. You don't even ask. I would do Birmingham. I don't even ask, is that halal? It's like, that's understood. Like, you're insulting the guy by asking. So that's a huge benefit for us. But we're coming towards the break shortly, but I think we're discussing before we go. How do you guys, or how have you tried to overcome what that in some ways that's obviously lacking. In other ways, it makes up, because obviously we have the same problem here, like Muslim areas are the worst areas, unfortunately. Now it's changing slightly, but when you go to a Muslim area, it's normally quite dirty, it's normally not well looked after. It's, the noise is off charts, and we've had it recently, obviously, people, and whoever you are, I know you're listening, you're celebrating weddings at like 1 o'clock at night. Yeah. It's unacceptable, please stop. If you're listening, please contact me privately. So people got fireworks going off at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
I mean, that's because we live in a Muslim area. That's simply it, right? So you don't have those problems too.
No, we don't. We don't have enough concentration of Muslims in one area to kind of have that problem.
Yeah.
The one place we do have issues is masajids.
Okay.
So mainly, when you have Juma Salats, you will have people parking in the neighborhood.
Right.
They're blocking parking lots. They're blocking people's driveways.
Yeah.
And that's where, we're kind of become a nuisance, and a lot of people, neighbors, complain. Outside of that,
yeah,
the Muslims. I mean, I guess it's part of it is because we don't really have a heavy concentration outside of the main New York City area that I mentioned, or you might see them in Chicago, some major metropolitan areas that you would have higher concentration of Muslims.
Because the other thing is, your cities are huge.
They are. And that's why, 10 million people, you don't really still count as too many. If you look at UK, from what I understand, you have, 66 million,
and the population, I think, like 3% or something, or less than that.
Right.
Yeah.
Which is, still, what is it, 4 million, 4 5 million?
Yeah, roughly. Well, I think it's not that. I'll find it exactly, but yeah.
So, but when I come to Luton or similar areas, it seems like everyone is Muslim.
Yeah.
Right? As opposed to US, of course, having, at least in terms of quantity, more Muslims, yet the perception is you can't tell.
No,
you really can't tell.
So we got 3.8 Muslims in the UK. Out of obviously what the 6.7% of the population. Which is interesting actually, because that actually, and I don't want to start this now because that's going to be a longer discussion, but that leads us quite nicely on to the next part, which is, does that have a huge part, does that play a massive part on identity? The fact that you don't actually have strong communities as such, or is that the right thing to say? Concentrated communities, does that play a part on identity? And we'll come to that discussion. But, and I just want to quickly brief the listeners on what we've been talking about before we go on our break. So we have Brother Shakaib with us, who's joined us from America. And obviously, as we discussed, he's had a background in multiple areas of the American Muslim life. And so we want to discuss, and we are diving deep into the differences between the UK and the similarities with the UK and the US Muslim situation. And I think one of the things we've come across is they don't have a large concentration of Muslims as we do, for instance, in Luton. And so it'd be interesting when we come back. I want to talk about how that has an impact on identity. And because I think we don't identify as strongly as the Americans do with their native land. Join us again after the break, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
This program will continue after the break. Continue listening to Inspire FM. Inspire FM. Inspire 105.1 FM.
Hi, my name's Abdul Khan. I'm a writer and a lawyer, and I want you to keep listening to Inspire FM.
It's time to think big. Visit Barnfield College's Open Day on Saturday the 17th of June from 9:30 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Drop into the state-of-the-art New Bedford Road campus to explore your options. Choose from A-levels, B-Techs, T-levels or apprenticeships. Or visit Enterprise Way campus for construction and engineering courses. Choose Barnfield College and you'll develop the skills needed to unlock a career with no limits. Search Barnfield College to book your place at the Summer Open Day. You don't have to go to Pakistan to enjoy the finest Asian food. Enjoy a great choice of authentic cuisine at Little Lahore Tandoori Restaurant and Takeaway in Dunstable, with mouth-watering chicken, lamb, veg and fish dishes, Chersi Karahi, Nihari, mixed grill, platters and for so much more. The Little Lahore Restaurant also has a separate hall for private parties for up to 50 people at 2 Nicholas Way, LU6 1TD. Or order via Deliveroo, Uber Eats or Just Eat. We also provide external catering. For more information, call 01582 353 983. That's Little Lahore for the finest Pakistani cuisine.
We turn to Allah, and Allah at times makes every plan that we have fail because we haven't added Him into the equation.
You are number 19 in the queue.
Tired of hearing this? Waiting weeks for an NHS appointment? Optimise Body and Mind puts your health first.
I took a blood test and found out I was vitamin deficient.
That's right. Urgent GP appointments for just £45. Prompt, personalised care when you need it most.
I took a vitamin injection and now I feel like a me person.
Deal with symptoms, vitamin deficiencies, hormone imbalances, and pick up any early signs of illness. Put your health first with Optimised Body and Mind. Call us on 0333 012 4214 or visit optimisedbodyandmind.co.uk to book your appointment today. Your health is our priority.
Luton's most luxurious venue for Asian weddings is now bigger and better than ever before. With 2 venues to choose from, Venue Central can provide the ultimate setting for your wedding. 2 huge venues, 1 high standard, right in the centre of Luton. Visit us online today at venuecentral.co.uk or call us now on 01582 451 767. Venue Central, affordable luxury in a central location.
10 सालों से आपके ताउन से एसकेटी वेलफेयर ने लाखों अफराद की मदद की है जो खुराक, रिहाइश, पानी और तिबी इमदाद की कमी की वजह से मुश्किल से दो चार थे। पाकिस्तान, शाम, अफ्रीका, यमन, फलस्तीन और बांग्लादेश में रोहिंग्या महाजरीन की मदद के लिए आपका शुक्रिया। अभी अतिया करें 0300 3020 786 या www.sktwelfare.org। रोजाना आपके सिर्फ 85 पैसे किसी को जरूरी खुराक मुहैया कर सकते हैं।
We always want to know how to look after our health or the health and well-being of our loved ones. We always like to know what are the best exercise to adopt, or we want to know how to access certain health services. We address these and many similar health-related queries and advice in the Health Division with me, Fahad Mateen, on every Thursday at 6 p.m.
From the studios of Inspire FM, the time is now 6:30.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome to Inspire 105.1 FM. You are listening to A Fair Reflection. We are having a deep discussion, and I have a feeling the second part might turn slightly hostile. I'm joined online by our brother Shakaib Jamal from the USA. I want to say US of A. It sounds cooler. And so we're discussing the differences, and I think just before we went on a break, we were talking about how the Muslims are concentrated more so in the UK, and because the population in the US and the landmass is huge, you can't see that same concentration in the US. We make 6.7% of the population, by the way. I did not know that fact. So we're actually a sizable portion of the population. And I think we're quite well represented in terms of actually people from our backgrounds. That's a different question if we're actually well represented in terms of the values they hold. But again, that's a different show. Let's talk about identity. That's one of our common themes in any discussion, in any Muslim convention, in any Muslim circle. Obviously, we've got multiple types of brands of the Muslim identity in the UK. We've got Salafis, we've got the Hanafis, the Barelvis, the Deobandis, the Jamaatis. They're different brands, but all of them seem to be struggling with this one, identity. Because the young people seem like they might not identify in the same way, and there's a lot of confusion. But mostly, any young person identifies as two things. As two nationalities, sorry. Religion is a separate thing altogether. So they'll say Muslim or whatever. And obviously the push from the Muslim population is to make that the number one identity, right? The religion. Yeah. And then number two would be your national identity. But even that's quite debated, because people, if you ask a normal person where you're from, they'll say, well, I'm British. No, I'm British. But if someone will say you're English to that person will say, no, I'm not English, I'm British. But if you actually dug down and actually understood what was happening, it doesn't make any sense, because technically anyone that lives in England, right, was born, bred, and speaks English, has the passport, all of those criteria match that you are English by definition. Because English is not to do with blood or anything. It's like being Scottish. If you're born like the Hamza Yusuf, who's become the new First Minister of Scotland, is Scottish. But again, even he said, I'm Scottish Pakistani. right? Most of the time you hear him talk, he says Scottish Pakistani. So we have this problem, I don't know if it's a problem, but I don't identify solely as English. We definitely don't as English. But even British, we will say we're British, but we'll often caveat that we're British Pakistani, British Bengali, British Indian.
Right.
What is the situation in the US? How is American or being an American, is that something people are proud of? Is that something they flout about?
Yeah. Well, let me ask you a question though, just to clarify.
Yeah.
When you say people don't identify as British or English, is that all different generations, or you're talking about people that are, have migrated from different countries, or you're talking about people born and raised and bred in the UK?
So I'm not even talking about the people that migrate, because those people don't identify as British, and it doesn't make sense for them to be British anyway. Just having a passport doesn't necessarily, I mean, legally it does, but from a culture, from an upbringing, from a thinking point of view, it's not British, right? And they don't call themselves British by any means. They call themselves just Pakistani. Right? I'm talking about the generation that's born and grown up here.
Right.
They are either confused, or mostly it's, no, we're not just British, we're British and Pakistani. And I think that's actually a really good thing in some ways. But I'm trying to understand more so the American situation and why we find ourselves in the situation that we're in.
Right. I think for us, I don't view that as necessarily a problem, right? And again, it is subjective, individually. But for me, my analysis is that most individuals in the U.S. that have been born and raised and bred in the U.S. identify themselves as Americans, and they don't see anything wrong with it. This is the land that they were born in, and if their parents or their grandparents were from a different country, they still recognize, their lineage, but they still identify themselves as Americans. There's no hostility towards being American.
Right.
But I find that that's different for you. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, well, definitely more so than what you were saying, in terms of there is a clash.
Yeah.
Now, I think it's because the British obviously have a history. So we said the predominant people that are here are the people from the subcontinent.
Right.
Those are the same people that Britain had conquered, essentially, or has control over. That resentment, obviously, the young people have no idea, first of all. That generally they don't know any of the history about this happened, that happened. But from generation to generation, it's been passed down that there is some sort of a them versus us mentality. There is certainly that. No, that's not true for everyone, because in workplaces, in schools, you come across people that are British or whatever, and there's no difference. There's no barrier. There's no the other concept.
Right.
But then there's times where you do feel that, and generally as institutions or as establishments, that's more prevalent. So individuals not so much. But when you look at the history of a particular thing, you're like, oh man, this in some ways affects us. Whereas Americans have nothing to do with anything, right?
Right.
So the Muslims migrated, they're like, yeah, this is a new identity, great, let's get on with it. So I do feel there's a defense mechanism almost that people have put up to say, yeah, we're British, but we are British something, we're not British. What? And the thing I find really shocking is no one who calls us English.
Yeah.
Like, I've had people convince me, I think I mentioned this to you before, I've had white English people convince me that I'm English.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm there saying, nah, that can't be right. Well, there's a miscalculation there. and then the reasoning is very simple. So, but yeah, so I do believe we have that. And I think part of that is because of what we were talking about in the first part. Because of our concentrated domiciles and the fact we live so close to each other, we have learned to maintain our identity, which, again, this could be argued from the American point of view, and it'd be interesting to hear what you say to this. But we believe that, yes, we're British, and we're proud Britishers, and we'll defend the motherland, and we'll do whatever is necessary to progress the country. But this is not all. There is somewhere else that we come from, whether that's Nigeria, whether that's Pakistan, whether that's Bangladesh.
Right.
So we feel quite strongly about that.
Well, I think you're contradicting yourself when you say, you have dual identity, at the same time you identify with being British, right? It's one or the other. So for us, we're Americans, basically.
Yeah,
You're
it's interesting.
That's it. You're American because you're born and raised in that country. You're living in that country. You can still identify as the place, of your forefathers.
But you can't.
You
That's
have,
what we're doing.
you still have to own where you live. I almost feel like, there's this animosity that,
As I said, it doesn't get
that
hostile.
you guys have towards, your own country.
So it's not animosity, no. It's not to say that there's a hate for the country.
Right.
I think it's more the history and the nuances that come with it.
Yeah.
So no Muslim is gonna, in their right mind, go around saying, "Oh, I hate England," or "I want to do harm to them." That's not what I'm saying. Because I think most people that live there love the country in the sense of what they have and the identity that comes with it. But they cannot just identify themselves as being British, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I get that. But so maybe if we put some context to it, maybe it might be better to sort of understand. Because say, for example, if we have things happening in the US that we don't agree with, so foreign policy, for example, we'll go and have debates, we'll have, we'll go out on the streets and, what's the word?
Protest.
We'll protest. But we'll never get to a point where we'll just go up and say things like, you mentioned something earlier that when we were having a conversation, it gets really hostile in the UK if you have protests and things like that.
Hostile Muslim.
In the sense that you almost feel like you're an outsider and going against another country as opposed to, disagreeing with your own country.
Yeah, so I think Muslims here are quite, they're very loud about the differences. They don't cover up with, "Oh, we're British, so that's why we will be quiet." Whereas I feel with the Americans, that's what happens. And this is just my experience, I'm not saying that's one of them, but they have often defended American foreign policy to me, and I know of other people that have happened with, and which is unheard of.
Right.
Unheard of.
Right.
By British.
Right.
Because anyone that knows any politics in England would say, "No, this is wrong."
Right.
And they don't feel that need and desire to defend. Then that's what I'm saying. They're slightly detached from the identity. So they are British.
Right.
And they progress the country in every way possible. But they're not married to it in the sense of, even if they do wrong, they won't say, "Oh yeah, that's fine." I mean, they defend it basically.
Yeah. But we don't do that either. But
Really?
We do.
Really?
We own it. We said this is our foreign policy. There's something we're doing wrong, as opposed to saying, somebody else doing it. Like, it's almost like you take yourself out of the country and you point the finger back at the country that your foreign policy is wrong.
Yeah.
We say, we're part of the foreign policy, so we'll have, protests to disagree with what's being done.
So you guys actually feel part of the foreign policy. That's interesting.
We're not part of creating the foreign policy, but ultimately you gotta take responsibility, right?
Yeah, no, but we don't. That's what we differentiate ourselves. So I say, no, look, if we had a say in it as Muslims in the UK,
You're 6.7%. Why don't you have the same?
so we do have people representing, but the problem with a lot of people representing, not all of the class of good people, the problem that a lot of people representing is to get to those places, they have to make compromises. That's ultimately the problem.
Which is, I believe,
Well, that's part of it. That's part, whether it's the debate on gender, whether it's debate on likes and dislikes, or whether it's debate on family values, there's a lot. They have to compromise on a lot.
Right.
And this has come to light recently when it comes to Yusuf, for instance. The Scottish minister I mentioned, where someone asked him about the same question about LGBTQ, and his answer was, "I can't change the scriptures."
Yeah.
But I don't think it's the same. And so that sort of statement,
Right.
and that's where Muslims, we say, look, either, so now you've got two choices. You either assimilate and basically become whatever they want you to become,
Right.
or you kind of hold on to your values. Do your part as a citizen of the community, do your part, right? But don't let go of your values. We feel, I can almost say I feel, but the truth is, the reason I did this show was because we have a lot of discussion with people about America, and there seems to be a general perception that Americans are a lot more laid back. And not just laid back, they're not laid back, that's the wrong word, but they're a lot more tamed.
Tamed, okay.
That's what's the right
That's the word you're gonna go
Yeah,
with.
no, that's what's the right word. They're a lot more agreeable is the right word, with what happened in the country. Whereas, like here, we had a million march. Right? When the Iraq War happened, it wasn't even our war. It was the US war. Now, that's interesting. Did you guys have a million march? We had 2 million people come on the streets.
No, again, we did. I can't say what it was called, but there was 1 million march or 2 million.
But was it? Do you remember it being in the millions? Because that's quite a big thing to know, right?
I definitely remember protests happening. We certainly didn't approve of it or agree with it. And again, I think we probably didn't have. It wasn't as hostile as perhaps it was here. That I could say. But I think a lot of it, again, it has to
You
do
say
with.
hostile, actually unapologetic.
I think a lot of it comes from. I think that's the point I'm trying to make. A lot of it comes from the concentration.
Yeah,
and being able to be very confident in saying what you have to say, right? With the US, for the most part, we don't have representation, right? In the political system, in the political parties. So, we don't have the people representing us. The 2 or 3 people that you see, they've, like you said, made extreme compromises to make it to where they are. So they are quote unquote Muslims, but they don't really represent our values.
Yeah.
So
which is very similar here, by the way. I don't want to say that. I'm sure there's people in local governments that do. On the larger scales, national level and international level, I cannot name you a person who's Muslim that I can say, hand and heart say, he's never made a compromise.
Right.
And I'm not the type to go around and say, oh, he's this. I'm being genuine.
Right.
I cannot think of a time where they haven't come out and supported something which was completely. Look, your congresswoman, what's her name? Umar Asad, right? Or whatever. Again, with her as well, I think she's going to support LGBTQ communities and done all of that good stuff, right?
Yeah, I mean, she even walked in a
march.
A march.
See, that's what I mean. That's like, so no minister or no councillor or no that I know of who's considered Muslim in any strong sense would do that here. Because he knows if he does that, his entire vote back, which is obviously all Muslims, down the road. Finished.
Yeah, and well, look, if you take our example, she didn't get elected as a result of Muslim voting for her. She didn't need the Muslims. She got elected, despite us. So now that she's in that position, it doesn't really matter whether we own her or not. Our vote just doesn't count. It's just we're not strong enough. Our lobby is not strong enough.
How much population you 10 million of 360, did you say?
Yeah.
Wow. So you don't even make 5% of that, right?
No, it's about 3%.
3%, yeah.
It might have changed by now. I mean, you might have to don't Google it.
That's true. Yeah. So you got 10 million. Yeah.
Maybe a little bit more.
Yeah. Really expose you. Yeah. Okay. See, that's pretty interesting because we will have slightly different views of things that with the government, and I've had discussion in school, in university, at work, right, on the different levels, and people are just very open about what they feel. They don't mince their words, and we will when Tony Blair went to war, even though he's the prime minister of this country, as Muslims we felt completely like nothing to do with us. We would never in a million years ever own it. I've had people actually own foreign policy decisions, not only in the sense of, oh, you were right, but try and justify trying all that. So I think that's where the difference comes in. But how do you guys? So what I feel like what's happening in the American situation is you guys, with the new generation, might be losing some grounding with the ethnic background. Is that correct? Do you think that's happening slowly, generation by generation? Don't be biased here. Because with in the UK, that's slowly happening too, right? But at a very slow pace. I feel like in the US, it's far more rapid.
I don't know if I can say that. I don't know if I can say that. I mean, certainly, from generation to generation, in certain populations, you see a decline, what you described. But I also, on the other hand, I do feel that a lot of, whether it's immigrants or non-immigrants, I feel the communities that we're building in the U.S. and in Texas in particular, for example. What I've seen is there is a concentrated effort. We have to, and we are actually working much harder than people in Muslim communities. Having been to Pakistan and other Muslim communities, like a lot of times the religion and deen is just taken for granted, right? And we're kind of forced to work harder to build our own communities, to kind of build our own schools and make that extra effort and build those communities where now I feel that we're going towards the right direction a little bit. But as previously it was that we're all over the place. Right? We're losing our heads.
Yeah.
But I feel that's changing now.
So now there is what we described here essentially. They're trying to build more concentration.
Yeah. Yeah, like in particular, like I would give you an example of Texas. Right now, Texas is kind of southwest, which is sort of in the middle of the East Coast and the West Coast. And so there's an influx of individuals and families moving from both coasts, having been, in New York or California, otherwise spent a lot of time in beach cities or somewhere in between. Now they're growing families. Now they want to be around a Muslim environment. They want to raise their children in Muslim schools with right people around them. So that's part of the reason why the Dallas, Houston, these cities in Texas are becoming a hub for Muslims, and the concentration is becoming more and more and more. And that's where the real power comes from. So, and without the negative of making it dirty. We're not making the place dirty. We're actually adding value. So if we leave the community, people feel that they've lost something as opposed to the other way around, where they're like, good riddance, you're gone, the masjid is gone, there's no parking with you anymore.
Yeah.
So now the community that we're building, the people that are coming in are conscious of those facts of being good neighbors and taking care of each other. So, again, we're building value.
And how active is that? Let's talk about Texas. I know there's a lot of concentration there of Muslims. How active is that community in terms of outreach program, outreach work, diving into? I know because the people that lead that community would be like Umar Sulaiman, Sheikh Umar Sulaiman, Dr. Sikadi, I believe.
Yeah.
They're quite well-known characters even in the UK because of YouTube and stuff, right?
Right.
So, how well is it promoted?
They're very, very active. I think in the US, masajids are not a place of just praying salah. They're essentially community centers.
Right.
And so each masajid has obviously, 5 days of prayers, we have Jamal, Eid, and so on, the basic things. But then in addition to that, lots and lots of programs. So programs for young children, programs for teenagers, programs for, women, for men, for the community. We have, like, Very Islamic Center, for example, they have, so many different committees for each of them. So men committee, women committee, program committee, barbecues and breakfasts and schools and kids school and Sunday school. So they take more of a community approach where masjid is a place for you to bring your family in, not just for salah, not just for one day, but every single day it's open. Come in, spend time together as a family. You're not just going to salah and in and out. And that's true for most of the masajids in Dallas, Texas. Because now, like you mentioned, Yasafadi is in East Plano. They call it EPIC, East Plano Islamic Center. Sheikh Umar Sulaiman, who's not an imam, he's like a resident scholar in the Islamic Center. You have Islamic Center of Irving, which is called ICI. That's been around for about 20 years. You have a different imam there. So, the community that they're building is really inspiring. Yeah. And that's part of the reason people are attracted to.
So it's not just like a one-off mosque. There's a few sectors now growing.
Yeah. And this is just a few. I think, there's so many more that are kind of following the same route.
Because that's not the case here in the UK. Generally in the UK, the mosques are for praying purposes. Right, and then if you really fight hard, you can get it from maybe like the youth club, maybe the sisters in it, but it's still not family. You don't just rock up to the mosque because they're all getting a masjid. It's not like that. Yeah, it's not a place to chill out. You go there because there's a particular event on very specific, and it's for a number of 2 hours, and that's it. And you get straight out again, right? So I think if there's that, we're trying to one of the.
I think when my kids are younger, so oftentimes when I need to ask them, my wife's busy, I'll just put them in the car, go to the masjid, and just hang out. They'll run around, I'll sit down with the Quran, they'll run around for a bit. Yeah. Praise Allah, maybe I'll start to, Maghrib or Maghrib to Isha. Yeah. And, as people are coming in, they get to play with the kids and hang out. Really a true sense of community.
Because I remember one more country that I visited in Easter, I believe it was, and it was exactly that. There was a talk happening. It wasn't like a big talk. It was just normal after Salah and sit down, open the Quran type talk. Yeah. And the sisters on one side, obviously, and the kids were playing at fresh facilities. Yeah. There was a huge area, number one. Our mosques are like tiny. You take one step, like you're at the masjid. So yeah, I definitely felt that. So it's good to hear that the community is growing, and I think you guys are doing essentially what we did here by default. I think the elders that moved to the UK, they automatically just clung onto each other because of obviously came from, essentially people that came here were from very concentrated areas. They literally came from the same villages. So it was easy for us to basically build that sort of community. You guys, it's more the immigration that happened is for different reasons from different areas. Yeah. So now it's slowly it's transitioning into that. But I think as a UK, the UK Muslims, we need to transition slightly more now, and maybe adopt that sort of model actually, because just having communities close by is not working on its own. Right. It's really good, and it's stopped the progress of secular values, the bad secular values. Let's put secular values, because the ones that are anti-Islam, they have been very slow, but now it seems to be shifting. Yeah. So I think we may need to also adopt the model that you guys are working with America. So it's been really insightful talking to you, Brother Shakaib, and I know your time zone is completely different, and so it's been, and let's say, an interesting perspective.
No, I appreciate, again, it is all subjective. There's so many different viewpoints as far as all of these conversations. So I appreciate the time for having me, and really enjoyed the conversation.
No, it's been great. So that's okay. Listeners, as you have now made up your mind to move to Dallas, Texas, I shall see you there. But it's been really interesting, and we're going to carry this theme of discussion on in the next couple of months as well, a couple of times, because I want to look at more particular aspects, not just America, but we'll take someone from the Middle East, maybe someone from Pakistan, and have this discussed further. Join us again, same time, same place, after 2 weeks actually, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Assalamu alaikum. In Luton and surrounding areas, it is now time for Salat al-Asr.
लुटन और इसके मसाफात में नमाज़े असर का वक्त हुआ चाहता है.
This azan has been sponsored by Ideal Properties. Contact us on 01582 72 1110 or